Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to wish you welcome to the webinar on LeasePlan sustainability approach to promote EVs, which is hosted by our valuable sponsor LeasePlan. We are very excited to be able to host this event together with LeasePlan, and I personally am very excited to hear from our sponsor to see what they are doing with sustainability towards electric vehicles. So before we start, what I would like to request is everybody to just make sure that you have your microphone muted so that you do not disturb the presentation. And what we will do is, if you have a question, please put the questions in the chat. There's an option of a chat at the bottom of your screen. And the questions we can then ask the presenters at the end of the presentation. So first of all, I would like to introduce Mr. AJ Narain, who is the Managing Director of LeasePlan, and Mr. Vasil Stamanov, who is the Corporate Strategy Manager of LeasePlan. And I will now hand over to Mr. Vasil to start with the presentation. Vasil?
Thank you very much, Laurent. And thank you everyone for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedule. What I will do now is just share my my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation.
Yeah, we can see.
Great. Perfect. So yes, thank you again for our gracious hosts from the Benelux Business Council for inviting us to be able to share some interesting facts, we hope, on electric vehicles with you. So yeah, just quickly about myself. My name is Vasil Stamanov, so I'm a corporate strategy manager at LeasePlan Emirates. And I, along with Ajay Narain, who is our managing director, will be presenting today some interesting findings of research that LeasePlan has done in 2020. So today we'll start off with a brief overview of LeasePlan, which Ajay will do in a bit. Then we'll go into the electric vehicle readiness index, which is the first study which was conducted by LeasePlan over a number of countries, which is basically going to look at a comparison between the countries on their readiness for electric vehicles. What's going to be interesting there is also to look at the criteria of what LeasePlan believes are the necessary factors for making a country ready for electric vehicles. Then, kind of tying into that subject, we will go into our second study, which is another global study by LeasePlan on the car cost index, which is basically again comparing different countries and how much does it cost, how much is the total cost of ownership of vehicles between the different countries. So we will be comparing electric vehicles to diesel and petrol vehicles. And also along the different categories of vehicles, from the subcompact to the luxury vehicles. So I think again that will be quite interesting for everyone to look at. You will notice that these studies are very Europe-centric, and this is for a number of reasons. One being that, of course, electric vehicles are becoming more and more popular in Europe with quite a bit of incentives from the governments, and also LeasePlan is very in all the major markets in Europe, so that makes it a bit easier for us to also gather the data. But I believe a lot of the findings would be interesting also from the perspective of the UAE, and then we'll close the presentation with a few thoughts, slides on where we see electric mobility in the UAE at the moment and going into the future. So yes, I would like to then turn it over to Ajay to welcome everyone to the webinar, and then just have some introduction on LeasePlan and LeasePlan Emirates. Ajay, over to you.
Right. Thanks, Vasil. So I'd like to thank the Benelux Business Council for organizing this webinar. And of course, I'd also like to thank all the participants in this webinar for taking out the time to attend the webinar. Right. So for those who haven't heard too much about LeasePlan was founded way back in 1963 in the Netherlands, and is a world leader in car as a service, which is more commonly known as vehicle operating leases and fleet management solutions. So, and predominantly we actually offer B2B, but now in the last few years we have been offering retail leases to individuals, both globally as well as in the UAE now. We have a presence as a group in more than 30 plus countries, and we manage 1.9 million vehicles across the globe through more than 7,500 employees. And by virtue of being into fleet management and managing 1.9 million vehicles, we're also a major reseller of vehicles, of high quality used vehicles, and we're the largest reseller of used vehicles in Europe. Coming to the Emirates, about LeasePlan Emirates, we were founded in 2006, so more than about 14 years ago. And we were founded as a joint venture between Mubadala Development Company and LeasePlan Corporation. And we were the first global leasing and fleet management company in the GCC. Our head office is in Abu Dhabi, but we have our sales offices in Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, and Sharjah. And through these 4 offices, we offer our services across all the Emirates in the UAE. So moving to the next slide, sustainability is quite high on our agenda because we as LeasePlan Group realize our responsibility towards society given the nature of business we are in. So we are an ardent advocate of zero emission mobility, and which was also reflected that we were one of the founding partners of EV100, which is a body of corporates, which includes corporates like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, DHL, Hewlett-Packard, ourselves. So there were about 40 corporates that got together 3 years ago to form the EV100 with the ambition of electrifying their own fleet. We are also a member of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are also a signatory to the disclosure, we are a signatory to a statement made by the task force on climate-related financial disclosures. Our CEO is an ardent advocate also of zero emission mobility and has attended various discussions at the World Economic Forum. And apart from advocacy, we also believe in educating our customers as to what is next in low emission vehicles. So, and including an assessment of the total cost of ownership. We also tend to facilitate our customers to shift towards more sustainable mobility by providing them not only advice, but also providing them with the mechanism to move from less sustainable to more sustainable fleet. And in an effort to do that, we have made a pledge to lead by example, whereby LeasePlan's own fleet, so our corporate fleet that we have, as our employees have, will be either electric or hybrid, depending on which geographic region we're in, by the end of 2021. So all LeasePlan employees who are eligible for corporate vehicles will be driving either hybrid or electric vehicles by the end of 2021. So we would like to lead by example. So apart from that, we've carried out a lot of analysis, as Vasil was alluding to, and now I'll hand back to Vasil to take you through the analysis that we carry out at a global level.
Thank you very much, Ajay. Yes, so we can jump into some of the findings that I think will be quite interesting for everyone to have a look. So the first one, as I already mentioned, is the EV Readiness Index of 2020. So what is the EV Readiness Index? It is LeasePlan's index of analysis of the preparedness of 22 European countries for the electric vehicles, for the electric vehicle revolution, as we're calling it. So what is, I think, quite interesting and important for us are what do we feel are the four major factors for making a country or a market ready for electric vehicles. So those four factors are electric vehicle market maturity, availability of charging infrastructure, government incentives, and then our own experience with electric vehicles in each country. And I'll explain a bit more in the following slide what exactly we looked at when determining each of these factors. So you can also see the 22 countries that were part of the study. So as obviously Benelux Business Council, we're happy to see that both Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg were represented here. So we'll see where those three countries rank in comparison to the other countries. So again, a bit more on the readiness index. You can see the first category, as I already mentioned, is maturity of the electric vehicle market. And how do we calculate the maturity of the market? The first, so there's three factors for the maturity that we've taken into account. The number of electric vehicles registered in 2019 as a proportion of the total population of the country. Then the market share of electric vehicles, and by electric vehicles, I also want to emphasize that we're speaking about both battery electric vehicles, fully electric vehicles, and also hybrid electric vehicles. So the market share of electric vehicles from all vehicles registered in 2019, meaning how many electric vehicles were sold in that year as compared to the total number of sales. And also the share of fully electric battery electric vehicles from the total sales of electric vehicles. So how many were 100% electric versus the total population of electric and hybrid vehicles sold in the specific country. Then on the maturity of charging infrastructure, we looked at the number of public charge locations as a fraction of the total population of the country, number of public charge locations per electric vehicle registered in the country, and the percentage of fast chargers of the total charging plugs. You might be aware there's different types of chargers for electric vehicles. Some of them, what we are figuring as fast chargers, those are chargers which can charge your electric vehicle, the battery of the electric vehicle, up to 80% within 30 minutes. So those are considered as fast chargers. Then in terms of government incentives, of course, those are quite important in Europe and probably not so applicable here because we do not have taxes, obviously, is the score of all government incentives currently in place in the country and the score of all benefit in kind taxation benefits for electric vehicle drivers. And then in terms of LeasePlan orders, what we've taken into account is the percentage of electric vehicles in total orders in 2019 for LeasePlan vehicles. So out of our clients that ordered all their vehicles, what was the percentage of electric vehicles ordered, and the percentage again of fully electric as a portion of the total orders. So what are some of the findings? The EV Readiness Index shows that Netherlands, Norway, and the United Kingdom are now the best prepared countries in Europe for the electric vehicles, for the electric vehicle revolution. Across Europe, 5.7% of all newly registered vehicles are electric vehicles. That's for 2019. The number of electric vehicle registrations increased on average by 60% between 2018 and 2019, which is quite encouraging. And the countries with the highest increase are Luxembourg, Ireland, and the Netherlands, all of them exceeding 100% in terms of the proportion of new electric vehicles. Across Europe, there was also a 73% increase in public charging stations, and now there are over 4,000 fast charging locations in all countries that were part of the survey. And then also in 2019, more countries introduced or prolonged a wide range of government incentives for electric vehicles, which is obviously a key requirement for the EV uptake, because in terms of the actual cost of the vehicles, there still is a bit of a gap between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles. So really, to make them competitive, government incentives are quite important. On average, electric vehicle drivers are taxed 60% of what internal combustion drivers are paying at the moment in these European countries. And in 4 markets, Austria, Greece, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, electric vehicles are fully exempt from any driver taxation, which is obviously quite important factor. And then a final finding is the actual ranking per country. So I think, again, you can see we can be quite proud that the Netherlands is sharing the first place with Norway, and also Luxembourg and Belgium are also in the top half of the rankings. You would see also that there is pretty much a distinction between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. So Eastern European countries are mostly towards the bottom of the rankings, whereas the Western European countries are at the top of the rankings. There's quite a few factors on that. Some of them, of course, have to do with taxation, of how much governments are, first of all, how much taxation there is in general. In Western Europe, taxation is quite a bit higher than in Eastern Europe, so it's easier for governments to incentivize people to buy electric vehicles by lowering taxes. But also it's about investment. And again, in Western Europe, there's the willingness is there and the commitment is there towards investing in charging infrastructure, towards encouraging electric mobility, which is still a bit lagging behind in Eastern Europe. Then moving on to our second study, which is the car cost index. So what is the car cost index study? This is a comprehensive analysis of the cost of owning and operating a car, ranging from the subcompact segment to the executive segment in 18 European countries. So the factors that were taken into account in terms of cost of ownership are basically everything that needs to be taken account when you're driving a car. That's the fuel, depreciation, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. And in the 2020 edition, we try to average all the costs. Of course, you know that with a car, depreciation is usually higher in the beginning and then lower the more the car is in its lifespan. In terms of this study, we've averaged this out so that to make the comparison more fair. And also we assumed an annual mileage of 30,000 kilometers so that we can again compare all the costs equally. So what are some of the key findings from this study? The average monthly cost of driving a car varies quite a bit depending on the country. So from 491 euros per month in Hungary to more than pretty much almost double that in Switzerland. Again, this is the total cost of ownership, including the depreciation, including the fuel. So a lot of variances can be there between different countries. Taxation can be different. Fuel prices can be quite different depending on, again, taxes on the fuel. Relative to GDP, the total cost of ownership was the highest for drivers in Italy and Portugal and the lowest in Denmark and Sweden. And Norway and Switzerland are the most expensive places to drive internal combustion engine vehicles. And conversely, electric cars are significantly cheaper to drive than combustion engines in Norway and cheaper than petrol cars in Switzerland. Hungary was also deemed to be the cheapest place to drive a petrol car, and Greece for a diesel car. And electric cars in the compact segment are cost competitive in 8 European countries. The compact segment is Corolla, Toyota Corolla, VW Golf, Honda Civic. Those are the types of vehicles we're talking about here. While electric cars in the mid-size segment, mid-size is more VW, Volkswagen Passat, BMW 3, Audi A4, are cost competitive in 14 European countries. But then when we go into the more luxury category, which is BMW 5, Audi 6, Volvo S90, there are no cost competitive electric cars at the moment in that segment. So once again, here's quite an interesting graph of how expensive it is to drive a car. The different countries, again, ranging from Switzerland being 926. Then we have the Netherlands at about 739 euros per month. Belgium is there at 690, so about 50 euros cheaper than the Netherlands. Luxembourg, I believe, was not part of that study. So again, you can see a clear distinction that in Northern European countries, the cost of driving a vehicle is relatively high, while in Eastern Europe, Czech Republic, Greece, Hungary, those are the cheapest places to drive a car. And then, that's kind of follows on from the previous slide, is that wealthier countries tend to have higher costs. So, and then relative affordability of cars can be understood when comparing total cost of ownership to GDP per capita. So, for example, one finding there was that in Italy, the average cost is less affordable, since the average total cost of ownership is relatively high compared to the GDP of the country. So this is kind of an interesting graph in terms of plotting average total cost of ownership and the GDP per country. So basically, you can see that the outliers, Portugal and Italy, for example, are quite big outliers, where even though the GDP of the country is on the lower end, the cost of ownership is quite high. And then on the opposite side, you see Denmark, Austria, and Sweden, where they're enjoying lower total cost of ownership compared to their GDP. But yeah, in general, you can see quite a bit of a gap again between the Eastern European countries, East and South Europe, and West and North Europe. So moving on to the electric vehicles. So in the popular D segment of the vehicles, which is again the Passat, the BMW 3, electric vehicles have significantly lower monthly costs in the majority of the countries, which I believe is quite interesting for us to find. What are the main contributors to this trend? The increased fuel cost of diesel and petrol, and these are more fuel consuming cars than smaller cars. The high registration and road taxation, specifically for diesel cars, are a big contributor to making electric vehicles more cost competitive, and the increasing number of subsidies and tax breaks available for electric vehicles. So again, this is the same segment findings for some of the countries. Once again, the majority of these countries, you can see that the total cost of ownership of the electric vehicle is lower than both the diesel and petrol, with countries such as Italy and the Netherlands having quite a bit of a gap, actually, where you see more than 100 euros in terms of being more affordable to actually drive an electric vehicle these days than internal combustion. So moving on to the lower segments, these are again looking at cars from in the Toyota Yaris to Corollas, Golf, Civic. In those countries, pretty much electric vehicles are nearing cost parity with petrol and diesel vehicles. So more or less they're at the same level as petrol or diesel vehicles. So there's really isn't much of an advantage to driving one car versus the other, which is again becoming quite a bit means that basically electric vehicles are becoming quite a bit more interesting to the average driver, who might not be just looking at sustainability and being conscious of the environment, but is also looking out for their pocket. So the electric vehicles have lower costs of ownership thanks to the lower running costs, and the gap widens as EVs are driven further and longer. And this is especially true in the small category, where electric vehicles are achieving lower total cost of ownership than internal combustion engine for a 48 months ownership and further, and driving more than 30,000 kilometers per year. So again, you can see the comparison in the same category. Again, you can see that in Netherlands, petrol is just a bit slightly more cheaper than electric, and diesel is quite a bit more expensive because of taxation, mostly, I believe. And in most of the other countries, again, electric is pretty much on par, if not slightly cheaper, as in the case of Italy, with the internal combustion engines. So this is an interesting graph in terms of the electric vehicle competitiveness per segment and per country. So again, in the subcompact segment, you can see that the countries in green, which is basically the Norway, Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, are more cost competitive with electric vehicles than most of the other countries. Whereas in the compact segment, we see almost a 50-50 split in terms of the competitiveness of electric vehicles. And how do we define the cost competitiveness? It's basically when the total cost of ownership is within 5% margin of the total cost of ownership of the ICE vehicles or the internal combustion engine vehicles. So going into the higher categories, the mid-size category, which we already mentioned, is pretty much where electric vehicles are becoming more dominant in terms of cost competitiveness. You can see that pretty much in quite the majority of the countries, except for, I guess, Finland, and maybe one or two other countries, we see that electric vehicles have definitely reached cost competitiveness, if not are actually quite a bit superior in terms of cost competitiveness. And in the executive, which is then we're looking at the BMW 5, the Audi A6, those more luxury vehicles, the parity is not there yet. I believe part of the reason is that because in that segment, really the electric vehicles that are more widely available are the Teslas. So the Tesla Model S, for example, and the Teslas are not very cheap. And I believe as more and more manufacturers of vehicles are entering that segment with a bit more affordable offerings, that's where we would start seeing a change in that picture in the next 1 or 2 years, if we already don't have it in 2020. So another interesting thing to take into account is that electric vehicles have lower running costs and maintenance costs, which help to lower their overall total cost of ownership. So you can see here the total cost breakdown by type of vehicle. So for electric, you can see almost 60% of the total cost of ownership is the depreciation, basically meaning the purchase price of the vehicle. And then which is for diesel and petrol actually goes down to the 40s, into the 40%. So in terms of the actual sticker price, the electric vehicle is still quite a bit more expensive, but that is already being countered in some of the other items of the total cost of ownership, specifically the cost of fueling or charging in the case of electric vehicles, which for a petrol car can be 27% of all costs, and for a EV are about 10%. Also taxation, which is pretty much negligible for electric vehicles and can actually be 3 to 4% of the total cost for diesel and petrol. Whereas in the final three categories, insurance, repairs, maintenance, and any interest on the vehicle, pretty much we don't see a big difference between the three types of vehicles. But again, these are kind of interesting things to think about when we also look at our region. Why we feel we're quite optimistic about electric vehicles is that, again, if we go back to this slide, and the depreciation of the vehicle, which is about 60% at the moment, and the big part of that is the cost of the battery. Electric batteries are quite expensive to manufacture, but we are seeing that the cost of the batteries. So if you look at the top right-hand corner, that you can see that electric vehicle battery costs are falling quite significantly. So from 2010, where an electric vehicle battery was costing over $1,000 US dollars, to 2020, where we're at lower than 200, it's about 150, and it's projected that by 2024 the cost of a battery would be about 94 per kilowatt hour, and continuing to fall further at lower than $70 the more the technology develops by 2030. So that would have quite a significant impact in the cost of the vehicle, which of course would make them more and more attractive. Of course, there's the durability of the battery also that has to be there. Of course, people want to be able to drive long distances without having to charge. Some interesting aspects that are being looked at the moment is similar to petrol stations. You might have places where you might actually be able to stop there. They swap your battery for a few minutes. So they take out the old battery which is almost drained. They put in a new battery which is fully charged, and you continue. So this is one thing that quite a few manufacturers are looking into. Of course, it's not in place at the moment, I believe, but there are ways around making charging more efficient and faster, even if it doesn't mean just plugging in the car somewhere. And of course, automakers are set to launch hundreds of new electric vehicle models in the future, so all price points will be covered. And of course, the more competition there is, the more prices are likely to go down. Of course, emission targets are becoming tougher and tougher pretty much all over the world. Europe is one of the leading regions in this, where electric vehicle manufacturers have to abide by quite tough restrictions in terms of how much their fleets are emitting. So that will, of course, continue to promote electric vehicles within pretty much all the market players. So just a few more thoughts on electric mobility in the UAE. Of course, we were very focused on the European market. But of course, how does that? What are we seeing in the UAE, and what do we project in the UAE? So some of the positive developments that we're seeing in the region, as part of the Dubai Green Mobility Initiatives from 2020, 10% of Dubai government's investment in new vehicles should be for electric and hybrid cars, and we are starting to see it, especially taxi fleets in both. Dubai and Abu Dhabi are pretty much almost fully hybrid at the moment. So there's definitely the move in that direction. A similar mandate exists for the federal government, whereby total fleets of such entities have to comprise at least 10% electric vehicles by 2030. And there are also a number of driver incentives, mostly in Dubai at the moment. Free parking for Dubai registered electric vehicles until 2022, free charging for Dubai electric EVs in Dubai until 2021. And DEWA has installed around 250 charging stations around Dubai, which again is, as you might remember, is quite an important aspect of having a market become EVs in the market become more competitive. What are some of the challenges for electric vehicle adoption? As the UAE is a tax-free country, of course, luckily for us, the government's ability at the time to adopt a similar tax incentive as in the Western countries is more limited. So that's something that needs to basically, it won't be as easy as it is for some of the Western countries to incentivize drivers to choose electric. Electric vehicle penetration in the UAE is still limited. So as of the end of 2019, there were an estimated 1,800 fully electric vehicles registered in Dubai. Of course, that number is increasing. I think we're seeing more and more Teslas on the road, even here in Abu Dhabi, and I'm sure in Dubai is even more prevalent. But still, it's as a proportion of the entire fleet population in the UAE is still quite insignificant. Many electric vehicle models are not available locally, and the ones being sold locally usually have to be specifically ordered from abroad, which results in a long lead-in time. So even though some of the manufacturers have quite interesting and competitive electric vehicle models, if you go to a dealership locally, you're unlikely to be able to just purchase one. They might special order it for you, but it's still not something that's very popular with dealers here, unfortunately. And the process of installation of charging stations in private residences and office buildings can be further simplified. So just to close the presentation in terms of the country adoption outlook, what it will depend in the UAE is, again, charging infrastructure is very important. More public charging stations need to be available. So DEWA is doing quite a bit of progress in Dubai. It would be great to see the same in Abu Dhabi and in all the other Emirates, so that basically people feel reassured that they can travel around with an electric vehicle, even though and even if they have to charge at some point during their journey, they would find a place to do that. Prices of electric vehicles, of course, since it's not possible to make the prices of electric vehicles more attractive in the UAE by lowering taxes, because there are very few of those here. The market is really likely to pick up once the purchase price of electric vehicles do not differ significantly from those of petrol vehicles. And we're quite optimistic that we're getting nearer and nearer to that point. Dealer support, of course, dealerships in the UAE are still a bit reluctant to get behind electric vehicles, so we would like to see more dealer support, marketing, and then that's one way to really spearhead a bit the market adoption of electric vehicles. But still, based on the current trends, both globally and locally, we estimate that by 2022-2023, electric vehicles will become a real alternative for drivers in the UAE. So thank you very much. I know we went just a bit over time, but we would like to open up the discussion for any questions, any observations you might have had. And again, thank you very much for your participation in the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Fazil. It's fascinating, especially the data that you have on Europe, but also, of course, the link to the United Arab Emirates. I also saw today there was a stat coming out of Europe that showed, and that is a support of your own study material, that the Netherlands actually tops the rank of the lowest average CO2 emission per vehicle in Europe. And that gels well with your data on the number of EVs per capita. I think Luxembourg has some catching up to do. I saw your growth rates for Luxembourg, which is fine, but they're a bit behind the Netherlands in the average CO2. Probably they've got more people with bigger cars that can afford that. With that, I have just one question. We see that the charging is free in Dubai. Is there anything on the horizon for Abu Dhabi?
Not that we're aware, Frank, to be honest. There are, in terms of the charging infrastructure in Abu Dhabi, it's still quite a bit behind Dubai. So we're hoping, of course, that this will be the case, but we have not seen any indications at the moment, and but that's definitely a very valid question. There are regions, of course, there are places such as Masdar city which have plenty of charging, because again, this is more of a local initiative of Masdar and their management to, of course, promote electric vehicles. We have some of our own electric vehicles stationed at Masdar city as well. But in terms of city-wide or emirate-wide initiative, we have not come across anything. I'm not sure, Ajay, if you're aware of any.
Yeah.
Anything?
So I'll just add that we have engaged in discussions with the Department of Transport over here, right? And of course, they were quite excited about the idea to see how they can contribute. But of course, then came the pandemic, after which discussions were discontinued. But once things are a bit better and they're more, the department is more amicable to have meetings, then we will pursue that with them.
Thank you. And then there is a question by Jesus Ortiz Mingo, who had to leave, and it is a question that obviously I would have asked if he wouldn't have, and that's about your LeasePlan's view on hydrogen. We saw last week was the European Hydrogen Week, and there was a big announcement from industry that by 2030 they want to have 100,000 trucks run on hydrogen. There's going to be a network of 1,000 hydrogen refueling stations all over Europe. But also here, we've seen Dr. Sultan Al-Jabr at ADIPEC saying ADNOC is going to investigate, the future of fuels and how to make all kinds of renewable fuels from, either natural gas and you capture the CO2 or you make it from electricity. Similar remarks we had last week from the minister, who said, hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. How does LeasePlan look at that? And do you see anything coming in the time frame that you've seen for EVs in the field of hydrogen?
Sure, Ajay, maybe I'll take it and then you can contribute to that later. Yeah. So yeah, Frank, I think you're right. Hydrogen is definitely a very interesting alternative to electric vehicles. Of course, the two can also be looked at as complementary. What we understand and what our findings are in terms of hydrogen is that hydrogen has a lot of opportunity, especially to as you already mentioned, Frank, trucks, the heavy vehicles. This is where electric trucks and electric vehicles might actually not be quite as competitive as with the hydrogen counterparts. So we can kind of see them in terms of the passenger cars. It looks like more or less the market is already there for electric vehicles. There's quite a bit of investment. There's quite a determination from governments that in terms of passenger vehicles, electric would be the way to go. But I believe in terms of the bigger trucks, heavy duty vehicles, that's where hydrogen looks like is quite a bit more competitive for a number of reasons. I'm sure you probably have quite a bit of more details on that. So I believe that we believe that that would be the split going forward. Is that in terms of passenger vehicles, the majority of the models of the development of the investment will be in electric, and in terms of the heavier vehicles, that's where we would see hydrogen probably taking the lead. Of course, it's still hydrogen is a bit behind, maybe a few years behind the development and the infrastructure and the vehicle development. So it's difficult to see how things will develop. Of course, there might be the case that hydrogen will all of a sudden become quite a bit more cost competitive and really start challenging electric vehicles. But at the moment, especially for passenger vehicles, which is where LeasePlan is focused on, we really see mostly electric is where things are. I'm not sure, Ajay, if you have anything else.
So well, I'd just like to add that as far as of course hydrogen is much cleaner, right, as an option from a sustainability point of view, and also the range that it will provide is much higher, right, compared to if you refill a tank with hydrogen vis-a-vis recharge a battery. So the range of hydrogen also is much more than an electric vehicle. But as Vasil was alluding to, I think hydrogen is a bit behind in the race at the moment. So if you take the example of UK, right, there are only 20 refueling stations. I read an article way back in April. There were 20 refueling stations as against 30,000 publicly available charging points. So I think the electric vehicles have a first mover advantage. Of course, I know that in the European countries and the Netherlands, unlike in maybe in Swindon in the UK, which is called the hydrogen hub of the UK, there are a lot of experiments which are being conducted. But as Vasil was saying, we see both of them being complementing each other rather than being in competition. I think they will be complementary. People will have options to choose between at a later juncture. So I think once we sort of go along the path towards sustainability, both hydrogen and electric will provide viable options. And it will depend upon eventually who would win the battle would depend upon the infrastructure as well as the price, right? The price also of the Toyota vehicle, hydrogen Toyota vehicle is relatively still quite high, the Toyota Mirai. About £61,000, I think, is the retail price. So I think there's a lot to do on the pricing front as well as hydrogen is concerned. But eventually, with the technological advancement I think both hydrogen and electric vehicles will become viable options.
Yeah, thanks. No, I don't disagree that these things will, no doubt, exist both as an option, and yeah, it's an infrastructure play in the end. It has to meet the needs of the customers, etc. So there's a question from Ismail. Do you have a map about the charging points in Dubai? And perhaps that could be something you could share with corporate.
Yeah, Ismail, I think there is such a map is available on the DEWA website. I will double check and I can share this after the webinar with everyone that was here.
Good. Then, if there are no further questions, also in view of the time, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for your excellent presentation. It was fascinating insights, and obviously we want to see a similar development in the Emirates, not just for the CO2 emissions, but also for the air quality. I mean, we're all struggling, I think, with breathing a little bit, and to some extent it's natural, but there is also a big component of transport in that. So if we have a solution for that, to make the air in the cities cleaner, I think we're all for that. So with that, I would like to thank LeasePlan and the organizers, Mare and Laurent, for making this available. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'd like to thank the Benelux Business Council as well.
Thank you.